Hello everyone, welcome to Easy Economics. How are you all doing? I hope you all are doing good. Today I've brought for you all 0455 and 2281, May June 2026, paper 12. We'll be solving MCQs. Let's see what this paper has brought for us today. This paper has 30 MCQs, but then for all those who are now preparing for their paper 1 in the 2027 attempt, there are going to be 40 MCQs. And if you haven't watched my tutorial regarding the changes in the syllabus, it's already there in the up list. Do watch the syllabus update in order to be aware of the changes in the syllabus. All right, moving forward. Let's look at the first MCQ. The first MCQ says, what is an example of a free good? Now, by definition, a free good is a good that does not involve any opportunity cost. Why? Because there are no resources required to produce it, right? Such as sunshine, such as rainfall, right? So now what they have done is in these options, they have tried to confuse the candidates with something that is freely available, right? Something that is given free of charge. So they've tried to confuse the students in this way. Like for instance, if you read the options, the first option say headphones given away with a new mobile phone. So that's a free takeaway, right? B says machinery bought with a 0% interest bank loan. C says sunshine that powers a solar energy farm, and D says water that has been purified and bottled. Now, if you look at option A, B, and D, what are they? Though they are options that are free of charges, but they involve an opportunity cost. Why? Because resources were required in order to produce them. So, out of these four options, it's C, sunshine, which is a free good as classified by the definition. All right. So, for one, we'll shade in C as the correct answer. Moving forward, the second MCQ. What is the reward for the factor of production capital? Now, it's an easy MCQ. All you need to do is match each factor of production with its relevant reward. Interest, exactly. Interest is for capital. That's the correct answer. Profit goes to entrepreneur, rent goes to land, and wages goes to labor. So, it's A. So, for two, we'll shade in A as the correct answer. Hope you are with me. MCQ number three. Now, MCQ number three displays the choices for an individual between leisure and earnings. Now, what they have done is they are asking us to ascertain the vertical axis is displaying the hours of leisure per day, and the horizontal axis is displaying the earnings. Now, what the individual was doing was he was at a point Y initially. So he was here. Now, at this point Y, 8 was the number of hours he was devoting to leisure, and 80 was his earnings, right? Now what happened if he's moving to point X, like they say? If he's moving to point X, so now what happens? Why does he wants to move to point X? Because he wants to earn more leisure. So what happened if initially he was earning $80 and how much hours of leisure he was having? 8 hours. Now since he want more hours of leisure, so that means for 12 hours of leisure, he's now earning what? 60. So, in order to get more of 4 hours of leisure, what amount of earnings did he sacrifice? That would be the opportunity cost. They're asking what would be the opportunity cost for the individual if he decides to shift from point Y to point X. So, if he decides to shift from point Y to point X, notice for 4 more hours of leisure, $20 is the amount which he is sacrificing. So it's A, which is the opportunity cost, because we know opportunity cost is the cost of the best alternative foregone, right? So for three, we'll shade in A as the correct answer. Moving forward, MCQ 4. 4 says what would be classified by an economist as a macroeconomic aim. Now we know a macroeconomic aim is what? An aim which talks about the aggregate economy, right? Something such as unemployment, if the government wants to keep unemployment at the bare minimum, or price stability, right? So what are these? These are all macro aims, right? Or balance of payment surplus, or current account, a lesser current account deficit, right? A favorable BOP situation. These are what? These are all macro aims. So now let's look at the options. A says government increasing the unit tax on petrol. So now this is what? This is a policy. This is a government policy. B says a central bank having an inflation rate target of 2%. Yes, we are talking about inflation. This is a macroeconomic aim. This is the correct answer. Why it can't be C and D? Because C and D are again talking about micro, right? They're talking about things at the micro level. It's talking about a monopoly increasing its profit target. D is talking about a trade union. So these are all micro policies or micro related issues. And the first one, though it is talking about the government, but yet it's again a policy and not a macro aim. It's talking about a petrol related policy, right? It's not a macroeconomic aim. So for 4, we should in B as the correct answer. 5. NCQ number 5 is displaying the demand curves and the supply curve. Now they're saying D1 and S were the original demand in the supply curves for tea in a country. So now D1 and S. This was the equilibrium position initially. Let's label it as E1. This was the price, and this was the quantity traded, demanded, and supplied. Equilibrium quantity. Now, what would cause the demand curve to shift from D1 to D2? So now, why do you think the demand curve for T moved outwards? Now, we know whenever there's a shift, it's caused by factors other than the price of the good itself. So this means there must have been some other factor other than the price of the tea itself that caused the demand for tea to rise. So now if the demand for tea rose from D1 to D2. So there was an increase in demand. So now what made it do that? So now notice once it happened, what happened? The price rose. So did the equilibrium quantity. So the price shifted from, let's say, P1 to P2, and equilibrium quantity also rose. Now they are asking what led to this shift. Why did this shift occur? Let's look at the options. A says a decrease in the population. Now, so if there would have been a decrease in the population, the demand would have reduced. So it cannot be A. B says a decrease in the wage levels. Again, if the wage levels would have fallen, the demand would have shrunk. C says an increase in the price of the coffee. Could it be the answer? Yes, that's the answer. Why? Because coffee is what? It's a substitute. So this means what? When the price of a substitute rose, that means if the price of coffee rose, the demand for tea. So, so the demand for coffee must have fallen because the price of coffee rose. The demand for coffee fell. Therefore, people switched from coffee to tea. Therefore, the demand for tea rose. Demand for coffee fell and demand for tea rose. Get my point? So it's C. Why it can't be D? D is talking about sugar, and sugar is a complement, right? So this means if the price of sugar would have risen, so the demand for tea would not have increased. It would have fallen, right? So it has to be coffee. So 5 will shade in C as the correct answer. Hope you're with me. MCQ number 6. 6 is displaying the supply curve for a good. Now they're saying what causes an extension in the supply of the good. So that means we are on the same curve, but we are moving forward, right? Why would it happen? We all know that's because extension and contractions, we are on the same curve that occurs because of the price of the good itself, right? So it would be an increase in the price of the good, right? A says a decrease in the cost of producing the good. Again, it would be causing a shift inward, right? It would cause a shift inward. It cannot be the answer. B says a decrease in the price of the good. If it would have been a decrease in the price of the good, it would have been a contraction and not an extension. But over here, the question is talking about an extension. right? C says increase in the cost of producing the good. Again, it would have cost a shift inwards, a shift outwards because it's an increase, right? All right. So C would have cost a shift inward because the cost is increasing. The cost is increasing. Again, it's a shift inwards, right? So it has to be D by any chance. So 6, it's D. Moving forward. Now we are going to be talking about price elasticities of demand. All right. The elasticity of demand for cigarettes. Now we know cigarettes is what? The demand would be elastic or inelastic? Inelastic. You can look at the figure. It's a negative zero point 0.5, right? So the negative sign shows an inverse relationship, and the small amount, which is less than 1, is showing its inelasticity, right? So now the government decides to impose a tax on cigarettes. Why? Because it wants to reduce the consumption. Now, what are they saying? They're saying by how much is the price of the cigarettes rise to reduce consumption by 10%. So, if you are to reduce the consumption by 10%, what changes must take place in the price in order to avail that, right? So, we know price elasticity of demand is equals to percentage change in quantity demanded divided by percentage change in price, right? So if the PED is minus zero point 0.5, plug in the figure, right? And how much is the change in the quantity demanded? They want a 10%, which could be a zero point 0.1. This we don't know. We can put an X over here. They're already talking about how much is the price rise, right? So you bring the zero point 0.5 over here and you know, so it would gonna be 20%. All right. So this would be option D then. So for 7, we'll shade in D. You just need to plug in the figures, right? 8. Which type of good does not cause market failure? That means out of these 4 options, there would be one type of good which would not cause a disequilibrium. A says a demerit good, B says a free good, C says a merit good, D says a public good. Demerit goods, merit goods, public goods, all would be causing market failures. Why? It's only free good that would not cause a market failure because a free good does not involve an opportunity cost, right? Neither does it encounters any issues such as non-rivalry or non-excludability or overconsumption or underconsumption. So when it does not involve any such issues, that means it will not cause market failure. So for 8, it has to be B. I'll tell you why it can't be demerit good. A demerit good is what? That causes that causes market failure because it is overconsumed, right? A merit good is a good which is underconsumed. A public good has the issues of non-rivalry and non-excludability, right? So all these would be causing market failure except for free good. So for 8, we'll shade in B. Moving forward, MCQ 9. MCQ 9 is displaying a demand in a supply diagram. Now, they're saying initially the maximum price was P1. Now, the government reduced it and made it P2. Now, they're saying what would be the impact of the decrease. Now, initially, this was when maximum price imposed was P1. So, this was the demand. This was the supply and this was the demand. So, this means this was the shortage or the excess in demand. Now, when there was a further fall in the maximum price, so now notice the supply further shrank and the demand further rose. So, what happened? The gap widened. So, what happened? That there was an increase in quantity demanded. There was a decrease in excess demand. No, the demand increased. So, it cannot be A. A decrease in quantity demanded. No, the quantity demanded rose. So, it cannot be A. It cannot be B. C says an increase in excess supply. The supply was already short. This was already shortage. So either you could say that the shortage increased or you would say that the quantity demanded further rose. It either has to be these two options, right? So there was an increase in quantity demanded. So for 9, we'll shade in C. 10. A kg of rice was priced at zero point 0.5 in 1 year, but the price increased to 0.75. Which function of the money does this statement demonstrate? So now initially it was zero point 0.5, then it rose to 0.75 per kg. So which function of money is it talking about? Unit of account, right? It's talking about how much did 1 unit of rice cost, 1 kg of rice cost, right? So 10, it has to be B. It can't be deferred payment because that's talking about a payment made on a later date. Again, it can't be store of value, it cannot be a medium of exchange as well, right? So it has to be B. 11. 11 displays us a worker's total income and the deductions made. Now, the worker decided to save 10% of the disposable income. They're asking us how much did the person save. So, in order to first calculate the disposable income, we're going to calculate disposable income. Disposable income is we'll talk about all the earnings, less tax, and less any deductions. So, what we'll do is we'll add the annual wage and the overtime pay, which is going to be 20K. Out of this 20,000, we'll deduct 5,000, which is the direct tax, and we'll deduct the salary, other deductions. So 20,000 minus an 8,000 would give us a 12,000. So $12,000 was his disposable income. Of this 12,000, a 10% would be a $1,200, right? So of this 12,000, a 10% would be $1,200. So for 11, it has to be C. We should C as the correct answer. 12. A lawyer is deciding to become a teacher. What is a non-wage factor which would affect his decision? A non-wage factor would be any factor which does not involve any monetary impact, right? Something that does not involve money at all, right? So it could be then related to what? Working conditions, right? So any perks which is non-monetary, that would be classified as non-wage factor. The amount of holidays, the current earnings, the minimum wage rate, the rate of income tax. Now notice all of this involves some sort of monetary element, except for A, which is talking about the amount of holidays he would be having. So for 12, we'll shade in A as the correct answer. Moving forward, MCQ 13. 13 displays as the labor productivity index, real GDP per hour worked for a country over a 3-year period. Now notice how much was the labor productivity in year 1 was 100, year 2 104, year 3 109. So it kept on increasing. That means what? This means more output per unit of labor, right, per hour was being produced. So this means productivity was rising overall. What is most likely to have caused the changes over the period? So they are saying, why do you think the productivity would have been rising? Capital spending has fallen. If capital spending would have fallen, productivity would have been falling. It cannot be A. Workforce became more skilled. Excellent. That's the correct answer because when you invest in skills and training, the labor gets more productive, right? So their skills are updated and they are able to be performing at tasks better, just specializing, right? So they perform at tasks better, producing more output with the same amount of input. So for 13, it has to be B, right? If the markets would have become less competitive and the level of employment rate, these are all unrelated because the productivity would then not have been rising. Markets have become less competitive is not, productivity would not have been then happening. And if the level of employment would have been increasing, so productivity then not would have been an option then, right? Because level of employment rose, so real GDP has to be indexed to the productivity, right? So the skills increased. All right. 14. 14 talks about the label shows the units or factors of production that a firm needs to employ for 2 levels of output. Now they are saying if 100 output was produced, we required 6 units of land, 8 units of labor, 4 units of capital. And then for 200 units of output, which was double the size, 6 units of capital, 12 units of labor, and 9 units of land. That means you added 3 more units over here, 4 more units over here, and 2 more units over here. But notice the output doubled. Output doubled, but the amount of inputs for each factor of production did not rise by 100%, right? So, for instance, if you're talking about capital, right? So, capital rose by 2, right? So, capital rose by 50%, but the output rose by 100%. So, what does this shows? This shows economies of scale, right? This shows economies of scale because the output doubled, right? So the firm was able to produce more in contrast to the increase in the inputs, right? So the average cost must have been falling then, right? 14 is B. 15. A firm has a different set of costs for each levels of output. They're asking at which level is the average total cost lowest. So in order to calculate the average total cost, first we'll calculate the total cost. So what we'll do, we'll add fixed cost and variable cost. So 100 and a 600 would give us a 700, 900 and a 100 would give us a 1000. Keep on adding them. This would give us a 1200 and this would give us a 2000. Now, in order to calculate average total cost, we'll divide total cost by the output level. So, a 700 divided by a 10 would give us 70. 1000 divided by 20 would give us 50. 1200 divided by 30 would give us 40. And 2000 divided by 40 would give us 50. Now, at which level was the average total cost lowest? Now, first tell me where is the average total cost lowest? 40. So at 40, what is the output level? 30 units. So this means option C. Get it? How did I calculate average total cost? I divided the total cost by the output level. Right? All right, moving forward. So 15 will shade in C. 16. What may exist in a competitive market but not in a monopoly? This means out of these four options, there must be one factor, one attribute that can be found in a competitive market but not in a monopoly. Many sellers, economies of scale, barriers to entry, product differentiation. Economies of scale, barriers to entry, product differentiation all can exist in monopoly as well and in competitive market except for many sellers. Because many sellers is not a function of monopoly. Why? Because a monopoly is when there the market is dominated by a single supplier or a single producer, right? He is the price setter. Remember? So for 16, it has to be A. Moving forward, 17. 17 says, what is an international role of a government? So when we're talking about an international role of a government, we are talking about the international arena, international trade. A says improve health standards through an efficient healthcare system. B says to support export-oriented firms. C says to redistribute income. D says to increase productivity levels. So notice C, D, and A are all talking about domestic economy. It's B which is talking about international trade. So we'll shade in B as the correct answer. Moving forward, 18 says the government tries to reduce the rate of inflation. Which measure would help the unemployed is most likely to conflict with this aim. So if the government is trying to reduce the level of inflation, out of these four, which would not help it do so? That means which would be a barrier in this aim of government. Giving grants for travel to overcome high transport costs. This would help reduce inflation because you're helping them. B says offer training. Again, this would help them. C says providing information on job vacancies to raise mobility. So if you are raising their mobility, it would help them. D says raising benefits to increase living standard. If you are going to increase unemployment benefits, people would not become a part of the labor force. They would be satisfied with the unemployment benefits and they would rather stay unemployed rather than be a part of the labor force. So for 18, it has to be D. Moving forward, 19. In an economy, lower income earners tax pay 20%, high income earners pay 45. Which classification of tax is this? So this means you are charging a lesser percentage on lower income groups and a higher percentage as the incomes increase. So this means we are talking about a progressive tax system. So it has to be B. 19 is B. 20 says, what is an example of monetary policy? When we talk about monetary policy, we talk about either money supply or we talk about interest rates. So this means we are talking about increasing interest rate. 20 has to be D. Why it can't be the other options? Government expenditure is fiscal, imports is again related to balance payment or fiscal. Tax rates is again fiscal, so it cannot be A, B, C. It has to be D. 20 is D. Moving forward, 21. 21 says the government increases spending on education and training. Why? Because it wants to achieve international competitiveness. What would fall? So, if the government spend more on education and training, what would fall? A current account deficit, real GDP, HDI value, productivity of labor. Real GDP would increase, HDI value would improve, productivity of labor would improve, because when you're spending on each one of them, this would improve. It would be a current account deficit. Why? Because a current account deficit would increase, because then exports would be increasing and imports would fall, so the deficit would shrink. So 21 has to be A. 22 displays real GDP of a country in a particular year. Quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, quarter 4 figures. Now they're saying a quarter is of 3 months. At the end of which quarter the economy has experienced a recession. Now recession is what? Recession is a fall in the real GDP, right? For two consecutive quarters, right? For two consecutive quarters. Two consecutive quarters. Now notice, it was 100 over year, then it was 101, then it was 99, then it was 98. So at the end of which quarter? So at the end of which quarter for two successive quarters? That means at the end of quarter 4. 22 has to be D. Moving forward, 23. 23 displays selected indicators for the labor market. Now they have displayed us the amount of people who are employed, self-employed, unemployed, actively seeking work, long-term sick. Now they're saying based on this information, what is the percentage rate of unemployed? Now, how will we calculate this? We will, long-term sick is economically inactive. So they won't be a part of the labor force, right? So what we'll do is we'll talk about the employed, the self-employed, and the unemployed who are actively seeking work. They would be a part of the labor force. So this means 25 plus a 530 and a 33, right? So this is the amount of the population which would be taken as the working population. And how much was the unemployed? 3. So 3 upon 33 into 100. So what answer will we get? We'll get a 9.09. This is the percentage rate of unemployment. So 23 has to be A. 24. In 2018, a country had an inflation rate of 4%. The table shows the inflation rate in the following years. 2019, it was 4, then it fell to 2, then it was a negative 2, and then it was a negative 1. In which year did deflation start? Now, deflation is negative inflation. Deflation is negative inflation. So, in which year did negative inflation start? It started in 2021. Why it can't be 2020? Because falling rate of inflation is disinflation, and a negative inflation is deflation. So we are talking about a negative inflation. It has to be 2021, 24C. Moving forward, what is not a cause of absolute poverty? Now we know absolute poverty is when people have less income and they are unable to provide for the basic necessities of life. So what is not a cause? High unemployment is a cause, low literacy rate is a cause, poor health is a cause. State benefits could not be a cause, because state benefits help you alleviate poverty, right? It helps people who are unemployed. 24 has to be, 25 has to be D. 13, 26. 26 says what would usually be greater in a low income economy than a high income economy. So that means in a low income economy, which is more to be found than in a high income economy. The importance of the service sector? No. The length of life expectancy, that is already low. The level of capital intensive production? No. The number of children? Yes, the number of children in a low income economy is always higher than a high income economy, right? Because it's a developing nation, right? Country that's struggling. So 26 has to be D. 27. What would be a disadvantage to a country if it is specializing at a national level? Increase average cost of production, average cost would fall. Increase diversification, diversification would be a benefit. Increased exposure to external shocks. Yes, Why? Because once the country is only specializing in particular goods, so if the demand for those goods falls, so the country is going to face a setback, a drastic fall in its exports and its exports earning, and the domestic industries would face a severe hit. So it's always risky. So 27 has to be C. 28. Which change is not associated with the spread of globalization? So if globalization improves, what would not be there? Greater movement of labor would occur because people would be easily immigration, and immigration would increase. Longer product supply chains, no. This would improve. More effective tariff barriers, wider use of technology. Technology would be associated with globalization, more effective tariff barriers. Because once we are talking about globalization, we are talking about removal of tariff barriers. We are talking about free trade. So 28 has to be C. Moving forward, 29. What describes a fixed exchange rate system? And a fixed exchange rate system is which is pegged between certain paradigms, right? It is fixed with a certain range. So 29, the value of the currency is fixed and against another currency, right? All A, B, and C are irrelevant. 29 has to be D. Last MCQ, a country's BOP goes into a deficit. This means its imports are more than its exports. What is most likely to increase immediately as a consequence of this deficit? That means if the imports are more than exports, what would immediately increase? Economic growth, exchange rate, money supply, or unemployment rate? What would immediately increase? Economic growth would fall, exchange rate would fall, right? It's D because imports would increase and local goods demand would be falling, right? And labor would be laid off. So the unemployment rate is going to rise. So 30 has to be D. I hope you understood and enjoyed solving this paper with me. I'll be back with more past paper solutions for you. Stay tuned, subscribe, happy learning.